sage walks to the river in perfect peace. A pair of birds move in simple joy. And then, in a very simple but violent moment, that harmony is instantly broken. What rises next isn't just grief. It isn't just a cry, but rather it's the first poem in the world's literature. A protest, a curse, a moment of compassion so deep that it defines poetry. Today, we enter the unforgettable moment from where poetry was first born. Namaste, everyone, and welcome back to the Ramayana Odyssey Podcast. In this podcast, we journey through the Ramayana one story at a time, making everything as simple and accessible as possible. So first, we try to listen to the story itself, and then in the following episodes, we take a moment to pause to reflect on its deeper meaning and explore how its wisdom applies to our lives today. So, in our last story, we were with Maharshi Valmiki in a very powerful moment. The very moment he asked the divine sage Narada one of the most profound questions in all of literature, even today. Does there exist a human being who embodies all noble qualities? And then Valmiki lists the specific qualities he means. And then Narada answers with absolute certainty. Yes, such a person does exist. And that person is none other than Rama. But Narada didn't just give Valmiki Rama's name. He proceeded to unfold Rama's life. He revealed each of his qualities. Following that, he showed how Dharma lives through the life of Rama. And when Narada left, after conveying all of this information, Valmiki was no longer in doubt. Something inside him had settled very deeply. But today's story begins right after this happened, when Narada left. Because once clarity comes, it doesn't mean that life just stops right there. The day will still call out for you. The rivers around you will still flow, and the forest will continue to breathe. And in that ordinary continuation of life, something extraordinary happens to Valmiki. So, just to preface, today's story is about a pure moment of beauty, followed by a moment of shock, a moment of grief, and then finally, the birth of poetry. This, what we're discussing today, is the story of how Valmiki-ji, moved by absolute compassion, speaks the world's first Shloka, the famous Mā Niṣāda. And with that, the Ramayana begins to take poetic form. So let's enter the forest once again to see where we're at. After Narada had left, Valmiki remained seated beneath the ancient Ashwatha tree for a long period of time. The forest had gone back to being itself, and birds began to sing again in very soft intervals. The river continued its quiet flow, the air felt light, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary or disturbed. And yet, absolutely everything had changed. Inside Valmiki himself, a deep stillness had settled. Not the stillness you get when you're fatigued, but rather the stillness you get when something just very much clicks inside you. The questions that had once weighed on him had now softened. Dharma no longer felt fractured or cruel in nature, but Rather, it revealed itself as something subtle, something living, and something whole. He felt immense gratitude, not the kind of dramatic gratitude, not an emotional overflow, but something very quiet and profound. To have lived in such a time as Rama's life had unfolded is an absolutely incredible experience. To have seen Dharma embodied, not merely just argued within a human being. To have been guided without being pushed. He sat in that clarity for a long time. But then slowly, the day began to call back to him. The sun had risen higher, shadows have shifted, and footsteps moved somewhere along the ashrama. The rhythm of daily life had returned. There were ablutions to perform, rituals to observe, and so a day required to be lived. So Valmiki rose. His disciple Bharadvaja approached him, attentive as always, ready to accompany his Guruji to the river. So together then, they began walking towards the Tamasa River. And as they walked, Valmiki was very silent. Narada's words were no longer just echoing loudly in his mind. Rather, they had taken root in his heart. They have done their work, essentially. What remained was not merely instruction, per se, but rather readiness, a sense that something had been placed in his keeping, though it was something that he couldn't really name. The path beneath his feet was very familiar, and yet, without quite knowing why, Valmiki felt that this morning would not pass like an ordinary day. Miki walked ahead, and Bharadwaja followed a few steps behind his Guruji. The forest was now fully awake, but not in the way you'd expect a city to wake up. There was no rush, there was no noise, and there was no strain, just serenity. The forest moved in its own rhythm, essentially. It was steady, balanced, and complete. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in very scattered patterns. A gentle breeze passed through the trees, and birds called out to each other across the branches. Nothing seemed out of place in this forest. And then, after a short while, the Tamasa River came into view finally. It flowed very quietly. It was clear, still, and undisturbed, reflecting the sky above it without any sense of distortion. It didn't rush, it didn't resist, but rather it simply moved as it was meant to move, as it wished to move. Valmiki took a moment to pause and he looked at this Tamasa River. And then he said something absolutely beautiful. He said very softly to himself, not even to Bharadwaja, "This river is like the mind of a noble person, clear, gentle, and untouched by agitation." I thoroughly enjoyed reading this moment when I first came across of it because it really tells us something about Valmiki's state of mind. He's no longer looking at the world as someone who's driven by fear or impulse. Rather, he was seeing the river and he sees character. He sees nature. And he sees a mirror of that inner life that he now has. And this is one of the biggest signs of refinement that you can get. When the mind becomes quiet enough to speak, when the mind becomes quiet enough, the world begins to speak to it. Everything felt very aligned. For a very brief moment, there is absolutely nothing to question. There's nothing to resolve. There's just presence. And then something shifted very quickly. Not very far from where they were standing, movement catches Valmiki's attention instantly. So he looks over at whatever he hears. And on a low branch, he finds, gently curving over the water, a pair of birds sitting together. A pair of krauñca birds. They are close to one another, moving with that sort of beautiful ease that only beings at peace seem to truly have. Their small calls were very soft and unguarded. There was no anxiety for them. They were just living life with no tension, no caution, and only comfort. Only simple joy. Valmiki watched them quietly. He fixed his attention on them. But he didn't do so to analyze them. He didn't do it because he was curious as to what would happen, but he was just watching to appreciate them. There's something very complete in what he was saying. There was no conflict, no disturbance, just harmony at its purest form. The river continues to flow, the breeze moves, and the birds remain absorbed in one another's company, untouched by anything beyond themselves in their tiny world. It's like such a simple scene. It's so simple that it's so easy to not notice it. But yet in that simplicity, there is perfection. Perfection that we often fail to see without paying attention to it. Valmiki's gaze lingered at the scene, not because he was searching for meaning, but because there was nothing to question. The stillness inside him finds an echo outside of him. The world in that very moment feels whole. And then, without warning, it is absolutely shattered. A sharp sound cuts through the air. It is very sudden and unnatural and out of place. And before the mind can catch up, one of the birds convulses and falls, its wings beating wildly for a brief, desperate moment before it drops to the ground below, absolutely still. The other bird remains, watching the scene, and for one frozen instant, it doesn't move a muscle, as though it almost cannot comprehend what it had just seen. And then comes the cry, a pure cry of grief. It wasn't a song, it wasn't a call, it wasn't a sound that was meant to communicate, but absolutely audible grief that fills the air around that area. Just a moment ago, the forest held harmony, and now it holds anguish. Valmiki stands still. He doesn't turn around to search for the hunter that killed the bird. He doesn't immediately go to analyze the act. And he doesn't distance himself either. He simply watches and feels. And what he feels is not irritation. It isn't abstract pity. It's the absolute shock you feel when you see something innocent so violently broken. A life that had been once whole, joined, and at ease had been torn apart in a single moment in time. And the grief of the surviving bird does not stay outside of him. It actually enters him deeply, fully. And the grief of the surviving bird does not stay outside of Valmiki. It enters him deeply, fully even. Even today, there are moments when injustice pierces us before our brain can explain it. And in Valmiki's case, this pain didn't just become outrage alone. It came out in the form of a new expression. Not ordinary speech, not the usual flow of conversation, but the words were arranged with a very specific measure, rhythm, and balance. Before thought could intervene and organize itself to the situation at hand, before intention could even take a shape, before he could even hold it back, those words arose within him automatically. It wasn't casual speech, but it was something very precise and rhythmic and even complete, I'd say. What would become the first shloka, the first poetic expression of the Ramayana, and then, moved by compassion, what emerged was this.
Mā Niṣāda pratisthām tvamagama shāsvati samāha yat krauñca midhunāt ekam avadhi kāmamohitam.
Its spirit was this: an act that shatters. Innocent harmony cannot stand in alignment with what is right. The forest itself seemed to pause its daily activities around the utterance itself as well. The words carry force. They arise from sorrow, but not just sorrow. They carry moral protest. A life joined in innocent harmony has been fully shattered, and Valmiki's words rise as a response to that violation. And now, as the force of what he has spoken begins to settle, Valmiki becomes aware of something else. This was not ordinary speech, he came to realize. The words had come out with rhythm, with proportion, with a pattern, with measure, 4 lines, balanced, flowing, and memorable. But for the first time, sorrow had taken in the form of a measured verse. He hadn't constructed this verse. He didn't sit down to compose it, but yet it just came out complete. This is the exact thing that makes this moment so extraordinary and memorable for us today. That the first shloka is not written by literary ambition. It is born out of pure compassion, out of grief refined by a disciplined heart, out of sensitivity that has become an expression. And this is also something Bharadvaja picks up on as well. He recognizes not only the meaning of the words, but their pattern at hand. This isn't just speech. In that very quiet moment, Bharadvaja understands that this is something to be remembered, preserved, and carried forward. Valmiki falls silent. And now another thought arises within him. He looks to himself and asks, what was that? These words had not come from any sort of planning. I hadn't intended them. And they weren't even from reflection. They just erupted. And then he realizes something quite unsettling. He had spoken a curse. And now, after reaching this realization, the sage begins to question himself. Was this aligned with who I am now? After all, his life had been shaped by discipline. I mean, that's how he went from Ratnakara to Valmiki. He was shaped by stillness, by self-refinement as well. And yet, this response came faster than any sort of deliberation. He wasn't disturbed merely because he had spoken so strongly, but because the words had come with automatic force, form, and consequence. Because of this, Valmiki does not brush it aside. He doesn't justify himself either. Rather, he looks to himself and asks, What gave rise to these harsh words? What was their source? How did feeling take such a precise form? And this is another reason Valmiki is so remarkable. Even after uttering something so very profound, he doesn't become proud at all. In fact, he's just more reflective about it. He wants to understand what happened through him. And this is the very mark of a sage. Not just expression, but inquiry into the actual expression. Not just feelings, but understanding the source of all emotions. Bharadvaja, who was still there, remained quietly beside his guru, and soon, together, they walked back to the ashrama. The path remained exactly the same. The forest remained exactly the same. The day continues, but within Valmiki, something has opened almost. And by the time they return to the ashram, the uneasiness has settled again. Not as disturbance, but rather as a deep unsolved question. Valmiki then enters the ashram and takes his seat. He doesn't try to force an answer through just thought alone. Rather, he does what a true seeker of knowledge always does. He turns inward and looks within himself. He takes a moment and allows his mind to settle, not to escape the situation, but rather to just hold it for a little while in stillness. There is now a quiet trust in him that what he had said was not accidental. This moment is not without purpose, and that in time, meaning will reveal itself. He takes a moment and closes his eyes and waits for the answer to appear. And that is where we will pause today. This moment is not just the birth of a verse. It is the birth of something much larger in nature. A sage has been moved. Compassion has taken a verbal form that hasn't been spoken before. Language has found its rhythm, and poetry has been born. In our next episode, we'll see how this moment becomes the doorway through which the Ramayana itself begins to unfold. What happened in Valmiki's silence? What came next? And how did this become the first greatest epic poem in our tradition? We will continue this journey in the next story that we discuss. If this episode touched you and you feel this journey is a meaningful one, please help us take the message of the Ramayana to as many people as possible. Please do share your thoughts with us in the YouTube comments and follow the Ramayana Odyssey Podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you are listening there, please do take a moment to rate the podcast. Your support truly helps this wisdom reach more seekers. And if you are enjoying this journey, please subscribe to the Project Self YouTube channel for full episodes, reflections, and wisdom-filled conversations. Until next time, let us keep listening deeply, keep reflecting sincerely, and keep walking on this path together.